Here we are. Thank you so much for being here and for taking the time out of what I know will be an exceptionally busy diary. We're all meeting ourselves coming back at the moment, aren't we? So the idea of taking time out of the day job to do some learning and to kind of get some extra knowledge and just kind of have some time to think and reflect is can be seen to be a bit of a luxury, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate the fact that we've had such a positive response to this event and that so many of you have made the time to come and join us. I would like to extend a very warm welcome to you all today to this very first intuitive webinar. Blimey. So it's our ED&I knowledge session. And just in case you don't know who we are, where have you been for a start? Intuitive Talent Solutions provide permanent search facilities services to our clients for their senior and executive roles, and we also provide interim management support. And we've been doing that since January 2013 and have gone from strength to strength in terms of our reputation and also our team. So we're now a small but perfectly formed team of 6, all based in the north of England. So before we get cracking, we've got some housekeeping rules that I need to share with you. The sessions today are being recorded, so we will have the benefit of being able to share the wisdom of our amazing speakers with our wider community who weren't able to attend today's webinar. But we will not be recording the breakout sessions which happen towards the end of today's event. And that is simply because these breakout sessions are safe spaces. They are for you to have the conversations that need to be had, and sometimes those conversations can feel uncomfortable, but we do all, definitely myself included, need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. So it's your opportunity to do that later on today in a very safe space and to share some learning and to share some thoughts and reflections, which you can then bring back and share with the group. So we're recording the main sessions, but not the breakouts. The webinar is scheduled to finish at 3:30. And if we've got some good questions at the end, if we've got some good conversation flowing, we will go on slightly later than that. But the website was advertised to finish at 3:30. If you need to go at 3:30, you do not need a note from your mum. You are allowed to go. So please do feel free if you need to leave earlier for whatever reason, and pressures of life and work being what they are, we completely understand. So please, you're quite welcome to do just that. I've got some house rules that I am going to read out, so make sure I get them right. If you need to leave the webinar, just close your browser window. It's as straightforward as that. If you should be disconnected for any reason, just use the original link and that will bring you back into this session. And if you have any technical difficulties at all, thank goodness it's not me that's got to sort them out. Our amazing marketing team are on hand. So just put the question in the chat box and then one of our team will message you directly via the chat to offer support to get you back in the room, or if there's any issues with your sound or audio, etc. So those are the main house rules. I think the biggest one for me is around questions. It's kind of, if you've got questions, please do put them in the chat box. We really encourage questions. We've got a Q&A session at the end, and we really encourage that. We want you to ask as many questions as you can because it helps the rest of us learn. So please don't be shy. Stick them in the chat box, and we'll do a Q&A session at the end of today's event. So why a webinar? Why are we doing this? And it's kind of, yes, maybe my comfort zone needed stretching, but the main reason being that me and my team at Intuitive are in conversation every day with our clients, with candidates, with our wider network. And what we're very, very aware of are that there are certain subjects and topics that people are finding challenging. There are things that we need to do differently. How do we do it? How do we actually be able to learn enough to focus enough, to find the time, to find the resources, etc., to do things differently. And one of these areas, arguably, and a really critical area, is equality, diversity and inclusion. And that's why today's very first intuitive knowledge session is focusing on ED&I. I have probably a dozen books on this subject. I'm an avid reader, but what I'm not is an academic. And what I've found so far is that many of these books around diversity and any aspect of that area are quite academic. And I like to learn in a different way. So what I would really encourage you to do today is to obviously listen to the amazing speakers that we have, but also be prepared to contribute to the breakout sessions later on, share your knowledge, and then when we come back into the main plenary, be prepared to share again. We'll ask for a nominated speaker from each room, but be prepared to share your ideas and your thoughts. We would really appreciate it, and I genuinely think that's where a massive amount of value is going to come for today's webinar. Over the past number of years, there's been many reports which detail the business case for a more diverse workforce. McKinsey is probably the most well-known of these, but there's been the Lord Davis report, which seems about 100 years ago now. Many different reports, many of them, in all honesty, focused on the gender imbalance, and that's certainly, you know, it's an ongoing challenge. But not many of them focus on other protected characteristics. So we're starting to see some progress in terms of what diversity means, but it's progress and it's quite slow. One of the things which has changed as of April 2017, the government now require organisations with more than 250 employees to share their gender pay gap report. So are they paying men more than women for doing the same job, in other words? So there's some accountability being asked for. Literally this week, the House of Commons Women and Equalities Committee have said that they believe that large companies should be required by law to publish data on employee salaries around race and not just around gender. So they are calling for that to happen with effect from April 2023. And why not? You know, the cross-party group of MPs said that this is the first step to addressing the pay disparities. And what we know from the many reports that have come out, there's a strong business case. And they reckon that addressing racial inequality could boost the UK economy by £24 billion a year. So I think we're all ready for a bit of that, aren't we, after the last 2 years? So unless you have had your head in a bucket for the past half dozen years or so, you will have heard about the benefits to the bottom line of any organisation of focusing on having a workforce which represents the customer base and the communities that you serve. And I honestly believe that the majority of attendees to today's webinar will be very clear on what that business case is and the ethical and moral elements of why we should be doing it. What I think comes out of the conversations that we're having is that the actual practical and tangible ideas in relation to how. So we know the what, we know the why, but how do we do it? What are the areas that we should be focusing on? What are the tools and techniques we can use? Looking at different industry sectors, what's happening there, what's working well, how could we adapt that into the UK transport sector? Our white paper that loads of you have downloaded this week, and thank you for that, details different industry sectors and what's happening. So it's well worth looking elsewhere to see what the best practice actually is. So today is a conversation starter. That's what it's all about. It's to have a conversation. It's to provide you with an opportunity to either start the process or hopefully continue being comfortable with being uncomfortable and being in a safe place where questions and therefore learning and educating is encouraged. That's what it's all about. But I feel like I want to put it right out there now. I'm not the expert on this matter. I am learning as much as everyone else on this webinar. But what we have got are two exceptionally inspirational people who have agreed to join us on the webinar today to get that conversation started. If you're from the rail industry, then I'm confident that you will have already heard of Loraine Martins, OBE. So Loraine is the Director of Diversity and Inclusion for Network Rail. I first met her way back in 2013 at the launch of Women in Rail. And I can honestly say, I can still vividly remember that first conversation. What I can also remember is that massive feeling of inspiration that I got from that very first conversation. That's never waned. Every single time I speak to her, every time I hear her speak in a webinar situation or at a conference, I absolutely love her energy, and I'm still totally in awe of what she manages to achieve. I think she's done a deal with somebody to get more hours in the day, because I'm not quite sure how she does everything that she does, and remains as current and up to date with changes that are happening, and still manages to do voluntary work and raise a family and do all the other stuff that she does. So Loraine is joining us very shortly and will be sharing some thoughts and insights with you. Prior to her role as Director of D&I at Network Rail, Loraine led a multi-award winning team on equality and inclusion, employment and skills in the construction of the Olympic Park. So it's infrastructure, venues and facilities that were required for the London Olympics in 2012. She was awarded an MBE for that role. She's the Vice Chair of the Trust for London, a grant-making body which tackles inequality and poverty in the capital, and a Fellow of the Royal Society of Arts. She was also awarded an OBE in 2021 for her work to improve diversity throughout Network Rail and for her voluntary work with the National Mentoring Scheme. So like I said, she is a total inspiration. Our other speaker for today is just another fabulous lady. Sharon Amesu is a multi-award winning, motivational and highly inspirational speaker, executive coach and inclusive leadership expert. Sharon started her career in law. She was a criminal barrister for 16 years with a successful practice in the northwest of England. She now runs a consultancy that supports organisations with leadership development and diversity and inclusion initiatives. As a professional speaker, Sharon is invited to speak to audiences around the globe on women in leadership, inclusive leadership, leadership accountability, and I'm absolutely over the moon that she's leading this important discussion for us today. I first came across Sharon and her equally fabulous daughter, Afia, on one of their She Leads for Legacy webinars, which actually, by coincidence, featured our other headline speaker today, Loraine Martins. She Leads for Legacy is a community of individuals and organisations who are working together to reduce the barriers faced by Black female professionals aspiring for senior leadership and board level positions. When I read their mission statement, I knew that I'd found a kindred spirit. She Leads for Legacy says, "We don't believe in waiting for change to happen. We believe in accelerating change together." So on that note, shall we begin? Let's put the foot on the proverbial pedal and start to accelerate change together. Sharon, over to you.
I'm hoping that you can hear me. And if you can confirm in the chat that you can hear me, that would be marvelous. Thank you, Nina. I'm absolutely delighted to be with you today and with our audience. It's the pleasure to be having this conversation. And as you have said, Nina, this is very much a conversation starter. It's an opportunity for us to come in what I'm hoping we'll regard collectively as a safe space together where we can explore issues around the topic of diversity and inclusion and think together in this collective space about how we can go about effecting change. I'd like to start with this quote from James Baldwin. the eminent novelist, essayist, and thought leader. And he said, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. And I'm struck by these words because they invite us and challenge us in equal measure to see that the first step to effect change is awareness. It means slow looking at the things that are often uncomfortable, confronting, and even troubling at times. It's about choosing to see. And I mean, really see, not simply seeing with our eyes, but also with our heart. And I remember, I don't know how many of you are familiar with this old sort of nursery rhyme, which was red and yellow and pink and green, orange and purple and blue. And I remember the line of the song that said, listen with your eyes. I don't know, I'm not quite sure what that meant, but that what it was speaking to, I believe, is there is something which goes beyond what we actually see with our physical eyes, that takes and captures our hearts and implores our ears and causes us to incline our ear in a different way when we're slow looking and paying attention, where we move beyond conceptually understanding something. For example, the reports that we are no doubt familiar with in relation to diversity and inclusion, the McKinsey reports, the Deloitte reports, PwC, the Boston Consulting Group, and the various pieces of data that we see emerging day after day as to the benefits of diversity and inclusion. And what we're invited to do is say, how do we move beyond conceptually understanding that to conviction in our hearts? Back in 2015, there was an image that hit our media outlets and channels around the world. And you might recall this image. It was the saddening image of the little boy in that red t-shirt that was laid bare on this Turkish beach, the young child from Syria who, along with his family, had fled his country and was drowned. He ended up on this Turkish beach, and one of the headlines at the time read, "Humanity washed ashore." And subsequently, there's been research into why it is that this particular image gripped people's hearts in the way in which it did and impacted people in the way in which it did. And how it is that people were mobilized, not simply moved by, but actually moved to. And this research has pointed to the fact that there was a connection with the picture itself. The image was compelling. The image meant that this story was no longer distant, remote, and disconnected. It wasn't just a feature story somewhere which people might sympathize with but not relate to. That picture, that image pressed home a reality that emblazoned the heart to take agency and mobilize change. And one of my friends who saw this image herself found agency within herself. I remember it very distinctly, that she, seeing this image where one person's story had ended on the beach, had for herself thought about a preferred future. And she formed a local community group to fund a Syrian family who came into the country. They were relocated to the UK. They were housed by my friend's family and this community, and then supported to set up a restaurant in that community. A moving story that in one way had started and ended with a young boy on a beach, but actually had moved into a preferred future that sparked hope to a whole family finding a new home and establishing an entirely new business. Moved by, moved to, inspired by, inspired to. And our hope is that in this opportunity together, that in this round table, we will collectively be challenged and inspired to go beyond moved by into move to, beyond inspired by into inspired to take action. We will have our own moving picture of what is currently the status quo and the state of affairs as far as the diversity and inclusion agenda is concerned across the UK, within our sector, within our own businesses. But also what we're inviting us to do is say, well, what is the preferred future here? How do we move from the beach, metaphorically, to the business? And how do we ensure that, as James Baldwin says, we are willing to face up and have a look at and see what needs to be seen? How do we ensure that we are not flinching away from the gender pay gap that has been referenced by Nina? How do we ensure that we're not flinching away from the ethnicity pay gaps? That we're not flinching away from workplace discrimination? Just a matter of a few days ago, an ex-BNP banker won a £2 million payout because of gender discrimination. Another recent report where a mother was refused the opportunity to finish work by 5 p.m. and she each day, and she won a payout of £185. We know that 48%, a recent report by CIPD established that 48% of organizations still do not have a formal diversity policy. And yet, what we also do know through the likes of the research conducted by McKinsey and the like is that where we do have greater diversity in our organizations, where we do have greater representation across a range of characteristics, both visible diversity and less visible diversity, then what we have is greater innovation. In fact, one particular report points to the fact that you have up to 19% greater innovation where you have more diversity in a team. We know the report by McKinsey that points to 21% and 33% in relation to greater gender and ethnicity diversity as far as productivity and profitability is concerned. The preferred future. One of the things that I'm always really keen to support organizations with reflecting on is how we ensure that we are future fit as a sector, as a business, as a leader. And there's a very interesting piece of research that was undertaken by an author called Jacob Morgan, who wrote a book called Future Leader. I highly recommend it. And in this book, he and his research team had interviewed over 100 senior executives and over 14,000 employees, over 100 senior executives, over 14,000 employees. And in this research, they posed the question, what do you see as the future trends of leadership? What are the future trends that we're going to see in the workplace? What should we be looking out for in our organizations? And they identified 6 particular trends that we should be paying attention to. A number of these you will no doubt be already familiar with. First of all, the pace of change. And I'm sure that immediately resonates with us because we are at breakneck speed with change in so many ways. The pace of change is unrelenting. They also point to artificial intelligence, and we can see that there isn't this continued emergence. For some, there's even a fear as to the pace of artificial intelligence being introduced into every aspect of life, but that will continue. The trajectory and the direction of travel has been set. What is also very interesting is purpose has been identified as a future trend. And we'll be aware of, won't we, that increasingly we'll have the millennials demographics and the Gen Zers who are very conscious of, for example, ethical fashion. Where are they buying their clothing? Where are products being produced? This sense of purpose in what they're doing, and also purpose in where they're working. And there's some really interesting research by Deloitte, which points to the fact that Gen Zers and millennials are particularly focused on whether or not their organization has representation at senior leadership level and within the workforce. And those organizations that do, then Gen Zers and your millennials are more likely to stay in that organization for 5 years or more. Well, why is that important? Because we will no doubt have heard of terms such as the Great Resignation and the Great Attrition, or others have described it as the Great Quit. What is that? That in particular under lockdown, there has been an increasing awareness and agency among employees as to where they want to work and how they want to work and what sort of organization really appeals to them. And so it beholds us as leaders to really think about how do we ensure that we are employers of choice through the environments that we create? Because there is indeed a talent war. And I'm sure that when Loraine comes on, she'll be able to speak to the unique challenges as far as the clearly compared with other sectors, the rail industry does not have the same level of churn, for example, compared with retail. But certainly an aging population within your sector means that there is a real challenge as to how you attract new talent into the industry. And that takes me to the next of Jacob Morgan's observations as far as trends, which is the diversification of the talent pool. We are increasingly diverse as a nation. And understanding that in order for us to continue to attract and be attractive, then where there is a skill shortage and real problems in the labor market, how is it that we ensure that we are tapping into as diverse and as rich a pool as possible? Then we have to think about diversity and inclusion. And then finally, the final of these is globalization. Increasingly so, there's an expectation that between 2019, the population across Asia, Africa and Latin America was 1.6 million. By 2025, it's expected that that will be 3.2 billion. We are becoming increasingly globalized. Of course, with Brexit, it means that we have to really think about where we are marketing our wares, as it were, and connecting with other diverse markets will be really important. And key stakeholders, that is our client base, our customer base, our investors and the like, are increasingly paying attention to whether or not our organizations are representative of the communities that we sit in and that we serve. And so we invite you to the table today because we want to encourage us to collectively think about how we do this, because we know conceptually that it's a necessary and right thing to do. And increasingly our conviction is growing, but then how do we do this? And our hope is today that you will be equipped and empowered and inspired to mobilize into action, to have that sense of agency, to have that sense of empowerment, that you individually and collectively within your organization are able to be agents of change on this agenda. Now, for sure, there are no silver bullets. This will not change overnight. but I believe that there are silver steps. That is, that one single act can make a difference, and that every single one of us can be a part of that. And so it now behoves me to invite Loraine, who is our eminent speaker. As Nina has said, we in fact, in Chile to the Legacy, the organization that Nina mentioned that I have co-founded, we invited Loraine to speak to us because of the breadth of her experience on the diversity and inclusion space and beyond. And truly, she is an inspirational leader, an inspirational speaker, and I'm very confident that she'll be really inspiring us with very practical experience and insights as to how we can move the dial. So I'm hoping that Loraine is with us and that she's able to come on screen. Loraine, are you there?
So for the more observant amongst you, you'll notice I'm not Loraine Martin. Loraine is due to join us at 1:30. It is on the dot of 1:30. And as I said earlier, we all know what diaries and calendars are like these days. So my able assistant over here is going to wave at me when we know that Loraine is in the house.
Is here for sure.
It gives me a really good opportunity to say, first of all, thank you, Sharon, for that starting point. Wow. You've really got some emotion moving in me with some of those images, and I love this term, Agents for Change, and I really appreciate the fact that there's no silver bullets, but there are silver steps. I love that. It's kind of this, let's do tiny things. Let's do tiny things because actually the tiny things add up. And actually, they're not always tiny things either. We might think they are, but in the overall scheme of things, they're quite significant.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah, I think you've started us off. I built you up, Sharon, to say how inspirational you are and how inspirational I find you, and you've certainly lived up to my headline. So thank you for that first session. I'm looking forward to hearing more wisdom and insights as we go through. Just to remind everybody, and I'm not sure whether I did make this clear at the beginning, so if you have any questions, we'd like you to put them in the chat box, please, so that when we do the Q&A session at the end of today's event, we've built in some time before we bring to a close. Any questions that you have, any comments that you'd like to share with the group, then please put them in the chat box, and our ACE team we'll sort those out and make sure that we have them to refer back to at the end of the session. Nigel's here now. I think that Mr. Harris has had some difficulty getting into the website, into the webinar. So you're here now, Nigel. Thank you for your support. And to every one of you, I've been seeing some friends of Intuitive, some familiar names of people that I already know, and also some new ones. So it's brilliant to see some people who have joined us that I don't already know. So thank you, all of you, each and every one of you, for being here. I think in relation to the next session, you've started us off with some really great food for thought, Sharon, in relation to this kind of Agents for Change. What can we do?
Yes.
And inviting us to the table to have this kind of collective action and understands that we are actually all in this together.
Yeah.
When you're speaking to people in other industry sectors and kind of generally as you kind of go around your daily life, are you finding that more and more people are coming to this collective understanding? Is there momentum, and is it greater, the same as, or less than it's been in the past in your experience?
Yeah, I think that the events of May 2020 were incredibly illuminating, empowering, striking, alarming for so many people, Nina. And there was just an awareness. I think that it was shocking for so many to have witnessed what took place, the murder of George Floyd. But what was even more inspiring was how that mobilized action around the world. So this event took place in one city in the US of A. And yet we had millions of people mobilized around the world saying, actually, this is wrong. And there are versions of this to varying degrees in the organizations that I'm working in the communities that we're living in. And so what it really did is brought our collective global attention to the issue of discrimination and inequality. The beauty of that, Nina, was that it didn't simply bring focus to racial injustice and racial inequality, which was right and absolutely the case, but it also sparked conversation more broadly. So how is it that we are treating people with other forms of difference in the workplace? How are we bringing and ensuring that our workplaces are inclusive of people who have disabilities, for example? Are we actively raising our awareness and being mindful of the challenges that people are facing, where they're not a part of the majority experience, but they're from a marginalized experience? And so for sure, in response to your question, without a doubt, it certainly sparked the conversation. Some of the frustration lies in, Nina, however, that for many organizations, there was this thrust of energy and engagement in the conversation, but there has been a waning with the passage of time. And what's great about this conversation is that it helps us to ensure that we keep this front and center, that we continue to engage the conversation, that we don't allow the passage of time to lure us back into the comfort of being ignorant and blind.
Yeah, absolutely, completely agree. Thank you, Sharon. And here's Loraine.
Here's Loraine. Marvelous.
Hello. I think you're hot off another webinar and another Q&A, aren't you, Loraine? You're so
Webinars
sought
are us.
after.
I apologise, and hopefully I haven't stressed you out too much. I do apologise.
Absolutely not. My stress levels were already on the roof, Loraine. They couldn't have gone any higher anyway.
I can imagine. Yeah, it's Race
absolute
Equality
delight.
Week, so it's incredibly busy. So
Absolutely.
I'm really pleased to be here. Great to see you again, Sharon, and thank you for having
Loraine.
me, Nina.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you and welcome. We're going to hand straight over to you, Loraine, in terms of what I've built you up to is sharing insights and wisdom. I know you can meet that brief absolutely beautifully. So I'm going to hand over to you to share some of those thoughts with us.
Thank you. So, by way of introduction, I work for Network Rail, which is responsible for the UK's rail infrastructure. We have something like 43,000 employees, 118,000 contractors. We are responsible. We've got 2,500 stations. We're responsible for 20 of them. So the major ones in all of the conurbations, like Manchester, Leeds, all of the ones in London, Glasgow, Edinburgh, and 30,000 kilometres of track, 20,000 tunnels, and we move about 28 billion freight tons. So if any of you are like me, during the lockdown, rail has been really important because it's brought me my goods before they even get to Amazon. So that's important because what we do, matters. It affects people. We're a really traditional organization. So, and I say traditional insofar as predominantly male. We're about 19% female, just over 9% Black, Asian, and minority ethnic colleagues. Of those who've shared the data, 5% are LGBT plus, and about 4% are disabled. So I give you that in a sense to kind of understand the context of the work. And diversity and inclusion is important to Network Rail because we have an aging population. We also have a skill shortage, so we do need to, as we're transforming and modernizing ourselves, we'll be using more technology. We need different types of skills within our sector. And we've exhausted the kind of traditional pipeline of talent, which has followed a kind of what I call paternal route. So many people who've been in rail, and people who've been in rail, they like it and they stay. They have come via their father, their uncle, their brother, their cousin, who's male. So that kind of lineage is our historic way of recruiting, and we've kind of exhausted that. We're also clear that we want to be an organisation that reflects the communities that we serve, and we want to access creativity, innovation, and all of those things that you get when you have more diverse organisations. So that's, for me, I joined Network Rail nine years ago, and it was, looking at diversity and inclusion was kind of like mission impossible for this kind of organisation, because we had at that time a couple of unsalubrious headlines attributed to us for failings around diversity. And at that time, Network Rail was really clear that it wanted to be different. It wanted to be a much more open, diverse, and inclusive organisation. So my task that I accepted then was really to try and help Network Rail to be a much more much more inclusive and diverse organisation. And I did that on the back of having already worked with the Olympic Delivery Authority in the construction of the Olympic Park. And again, if any of you know London and have been to Stratford and have seen the park, then you'll have seen a bit of my work, which was around creating an environment that could be used by everybody. So whether you're elite athletes, whether you're attending the games, or whether you're working in those environments. And the legacy today is again, my reference to shopping is not by chance. Westfield is a great place to go and spend lots of money, she said. But also the Olympic Park itself is incredibly accessible for all people. And West Ham are enjoying the fruits of the London Stadium, again, which is an incredibly accessible environment. Both these institutions, the Olympic Delivery Authority and the Network Rail, wanted and have diversity and inclusion as one of their priorities. And so the things that we needed to do in order to have any success, and I'll let others comment on whether or not we've been successful, is data. So we really need to understand, if you want to have any success around delivering change in any sphere, but particularly for diversity and inclusion, you need the evidence, you need the data, you need to know the composition of your workforce, you need to know where the gaps are, you need to know what the trends are, you need to be able to articulate that in a way that people can understand it, and then you use that data to drive the narrative about the changes that you want to make within your business. So in Network Rail, when I started, the data challenge was that we had lots of different ways of gathering that data. So we drew a line at the beginning and said, right, we need our paper-based data gathering to be the same as that which we collect electronically. We would like everybody in the organization to share their data. And in fact, at that time, we were using language of disclose. And if you remind me, I'll tell you what the difference is momentarily. But to disclose the data so that we understood the composition of our workforce. And we got quite a high return, I think about a 50% return, which was good for us in a sense. And we use that then as the platform, as ground zero, to say, right, this is what we look like as an organization. There appears to be underrepresentation of women. There appears to be underrepresentation of Black, Asian, and minority ethnic people, similarly disabled people, and lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender people. So this is what our data is saying to us. So on the basis of that, we will develop some initiatives that help us, one, to be more representative, but two, to create an environment in which diverse people from diverse backgrounds can flourish and thrive. So that data, that baseline has been the foundation of all of the work that we've done at Network Rail and driven the initiatives that we've set out. We then use that data to help us tell the story about why diversity and inclusion is important. So I talked a little bit earlier about the skills shortage, about the aging population, about wanting to reflect the society that we live in. Our data was very clearly saying we were somewhere short of that. And we were somewhere short of that and we're in an industry which is traditionally highly male and highly white. And I say that as descriptors, not as pejorative judgments. So telling the story and using the data to say, actually, what we want to do is increase the number of women in our organization. We want to increase the number of Black, Asian, or minority ethnic colleagues in our business, or disabled people in our business. And this is why, because there is underrepresentation. Our data was also telling us that there were some disparities. So, for example, Black, Asian, or minority ethnic colleagues are less likely to get the upper end of the performance ratings, more likely to be disciplined, less likely to get secondment opportunities. Again, this is our data telling us about what we're doing in our organization. So by feeding that back into our business, we're actually trying to drive the changes that we want to see. And that process is iterative. It's relentless. You have to report regularly, have a drumbeat around it so that people can see what's happening, what the progress is, where the challenges are, where the areas of improvement are. So I can't stress enough the importance of data, and particularly for an area of diversity and inclusion where people tend to have a pathology about it being all fluffy, soft, and moral. Those things, in sense, are kind of true, but they're not the essential truth. The essential truth for me now, having looked at what we've done at Network Rail and in ODA, is that diversity and inclusion is a transformation program. And therefore that data is about how you're enabling yourself to transform into a much more inclusive organization, much more high performing organization, where your people are really, really well engaged. So data and evidence, and then that evidence helping you to tell the story, has been absolutely crucial for us at Network Rail, and indeed for what we did at the Olympic Delivery Authority. And then so that it is seen as part of the business of the organization, not an adjunct to, not something that's a nice to have, but something that is really core to enabling any business to deliver what it wants to deliver. And again, that's an iterative process. As you grow in confidence and competence in doing that, you will be able to use the data to help align to your business objectives. That means it's part and parcel of what you're doing. And I liken our positioning of diversity and inclusion, particularly over the last year, to that of the positioning of safety. So within Network Rail, we're a safety critical organization. We talk about relentlessly everyone home safe every day. And yet we had a couple of incidents where accidents where people were injured, and the components of the contributory factors to those injuries was racism in the workplace. And so what we did was develop a resource that helped people to understand the connection between safety and inclusion, i.e., where people are included, where they're respected, where they are valued, our safety performance is better. We are looking out for each other much better. And I use that as an example of saying that's how diversity and inclusion can help with the business objectives. Our business objective is to have everyone home safe every day. Then we need to be an inclusive organization to deliver that. So aligning the diversity inclusion to the business objectives is absolutely crucial. And for us, it's been a bit of a game changer in enabling other people to see the connections to the day job. The other thing that's been really helpful for us, again, and I talk about diversity and inclusion being a discipline, is about having a strategy and a plan with deliverables, with milestones, and with targets. One that has been very transparent as Network Rail, we've been very transparent about what we want to do. We've said that we want to increase the number of women in our business. We want to increase the number of Black, Asian, and minority ethnic people in our business. We want to see increase in the leadership of our and change in the leadership of our organization. We've set some really clear targets about what we want to achieve. We've given some markers about where we think we should be and the things that we should be achieving in order to get to the greater objective. And we have stuck to delivering that plan. And why that's important is because it helps the business, it gives business visibility of the things that you need to do and the activities that you undertake in order to achieve the end game. And that's been both a permission to do, as in, this is what we're going to do, but it's also enabled people to see the activities that we've been engaged in over the last 9 years. And that is, again, helpful for people. You give them a story, you tell them what the story is, and then you help them go through the different chapters. So the kind of milestones that we have been, we've achieved that we're in the top 50 employers for women. And if you'd asked me if, at the start of Network, my sojourn at Network Rail, if that were possible, I would have looked at you quizzically. But yet still, we have managed to achieve that. We've just achieved silver status in the Clear Assured process, which is a measurement of a raft of processes and policies that you have as an organization that helps you to improve your practice and your approach. So it's a really quite a forensic tool. Only one organization has platinum, and that's HS2. And I think a couple others have gold. So we think we've done an all right job in attaining silver. We've also done an ethnicity matrix, and we've come up at level 3, just missing level 4, which is the top level. And I said it's not to boast or to pat ourselves on the back, but to say these are independent assessments of our work and our performance, but it also gives assurance that we're moving in the right direction. It's also objective, assessment of our work, not us marking our own homework. And that gives the organization confidence that we've set our stall out correctly, but also we're moving in the right direction. So having a strategy with a plan, with deliverables, with milestones and targets, as you would with any other business initiative, is really, really crucial. And then underpinning that, I think, is really about the leadership. So executive board, sponsorship, leading, buy-in and accountability, I think are absolutely, absolutely essential, because without that, it becomes very, very difficult to make the changes that you want to see in your organization. So in terms of the challenges that I face, and you probably will recognize of a kind of predominantly male organization, the challenges have been around leadership and leadership accountability. And I think as leaders, what we tell ourselves is that we as leaders, we're the kind of good people. We've told people what we want, and they should just go off and do it. And then we say, and you know what the real problem is, those people in the middle, the middle, they're not quite doing what we've asked and we've told them. I think my challenge to us as leaders, and I include myself in that because I'm really good to tell you something and expect it to be done by magic, is that we need to be really diligent about creating an environment in which people can succeed. We also need to role model the behaviors and the culture that we want in the environment. And too often it's really easy to devolve that responsibility and say, I've given it to somewhere else. So in terms of diversity and inclusion, it's that our leadership capacity and competence needs to be enhanced. And that's partly about leaders actually taking accountability, so having in their objectives, participating in reciprocal mentoring, engaging with employee networks, and asking intelligent questions, not only of the data, but also the culture, and then providing some adequate resourcing for that. The culture is also another area of challenge. So you will know that, and again, particularly for diversity and inclusion, it's emotive. So people feel licensed to have an opinion in the way that you don't have an opinion about finance, really. Finance, you've either got the money or you haven't, you've got the budget or you haven't, you spend it or you don't. In terms of diversity and inclusion, we touch people in ways that we find difficult to manage. And because people's opinions and people retain the right to have their opinions, it makes for a real challenge in terms of culture shift. So role modeling, helping and mapping out the journey, being resilient, being having low tolerance for poor behaviors is really important in terms of creating a culture that's inclusive. But also by demonstrating the culture that you want and the behaviors that you want, you give people examples of what good looks like and what you're aiming to. But you can do that in a way that doesn't set yourself up for failure, but says, actually, we're all learning on this journey. And I'm inviting you and entreating you to participate in this journey of change with me. We're going to make some mistakes, but we're going to learn from those mistakes and we're going to build. And that leads on to the other challenge, which is attitudes. And I think that too often in Network Rail in particular, we've recruited to particular skills and not to behaviors. And I think that needs to change, because you can pick up skills, but the behaviors are the kind of things and the values are the kind of things you bring with you that I think we need to emphasize more, the kind of good behaviors that we want in our sector. And that creates, I think, a real great opportunity for success. Then underpinning all of that, and I think I've coming up to the end of my time and I'm looking for a signal from someone. Underpinning all of that, and particularly if you're a diversity and inclusion lead, then you need resilience. So that resilience is about understanding not everybody will be signed up to diversity and inclusion. Some of us will nod really sagely and say the right things, but we create dissonance because our behaviors are not commensurate with the utterances, the things that you've heard. So the resilience is about, in my, my counsel is about making sure that you as an individual understand that this is not about you. This is about the business improvements, the business enhancing its way of working so that it can be much more inclusive, have much more diversity, and therefore make sure that it benefits from the diversity that it's brought into the organization and for the future. So if I draw a pause there, hopefully that's been helpful.
Sharon, it's been absolutely brilliant. Sharon, sorry, Loraine.
Okay.
So I do know your name, honestly. Absolutely inspiring, as I knew it would be. And what I really appreciate that you've done for us there is share the practical advice. Because in my intro earlier, which obviously you weren't privy to, but I was sharing with the audience, the reason why we wanted to do this webinar was that we felt that there was lots of what we should be doing and why we should be doing it in terms of a business case or the moral or the ethical reasons for why diversity and inclusion is the right thing to do. But what I really think we're lacking is that tangible, practical advice to say, this is what we've done. This is how we've approached it. And some of the stuff there that you've shared with us is just gold dust in terms of having a plan. That sounds straightforward, but as Sharon shared with us earlier, the CIPD shared some statistics last week to say that only 43%, 48% of organisations have actually got a plan and a strategy for diversity and inclusion. So what I kind of sit here in my naivety and think, well, of course, everybody's got a plan. Well, certainly, 90% of people. Well, no, they haven't. So you kind of expressing the importance of that, I think, is key. And then also as an industry, it's really interesting, isn't it, that we are looking in kind of every different aspect at the moment about how do we gather data and how do we use that data to actually propel us forward. So I think, and everything else, culture, recruiting for attitudes and values, not particular skills, you absolutely talking my language there without a shadow of a doubt. And resilience, because this isn't a straight road, is it? We're not just kind of going along on a level playing field and everything's going to go right. Everything different thing that we do, every small action, every big action. Sometimes we're going to go one step forward and sometimes we're going to go 2 steps back. And I think that can be frustrating. It can be annoying, it can be upsetting, but actually we've got to keep facing in the right direction and just keep moving forward with that resilience. I'm in danger of taking over the whole session. Sharon, I'm going to move over to you because I'm sure you've got some comments and some insights that you'd like to share following Lorraine's contribution.
No, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Brilliant. Yeah. Okay, so Loraine is one of those people who, whenever I hear her speak, she fills my notebook. That's the only way that I can describe you, Loraine. You fill my notebook. Now, I don't know if that's a good thing, because it then means, how do I get out everything I want to talk to you about? Alongside that, there is an audience, and the audience have their own questions, Nina. Yeah. But I think that just a couple of questions to open up with, first of all, Loraine, because you sparked so many points of inquiry for us. First of all, you said you'll tell us why you've used about disclose, and you said I'll come back to that and explain more about that. Can you tell us about that, please?
Yeah, so it's been brilliant. So the vexed issue, or the challenging issue, is how do you get people to tell you about their diversity? And in Network Rail, part of the mythology is, we're a safety critical organization, and there are particular areas where it's just intractable. People aren't telling us. So we started off with disclose. And then we were advised that disclose can have like negative connotations. I disclose my spent convictions, for example.
Yes.
So we wanted to kind of humanize it a bit, actually, and also to try to make it a little bit more matter of fact. So we landed on the word sharing. So actually, do you mind sharing? It's a bit more personal, a bit more, all you're doing is sharing. It's no more than that. But behind that sharing, then we explain, really clearly why we want you to share. We want to understand the composition of our workforce. We want to use that so that if there are any trends that we're identifying, we want to address them. We want to be able to do pay gap reporting. If it's incomplete, then we don't have accurate picture. We talk about who's got access to the information, and who you're sharing it with. So the sharing it's also a mindset. It makes it slightly different to disclosing, which people think, well, why should I disclose that? Generally, I don't mind sharing. I'll share with whatever you want. So it's a bit of a shift for us in terms of how you position that data. Does that make sense?
It absolutely makes sense. And I was wondering, sort of, were you able to measure the impact of that shifting, as it were, in the framing? Because as you say, what part of the challenge that we often hear is around the data gathering, and it's the trust. What are you going to be doing with my data? And so did you see a measurable difference, a marked improvement in the take-up in relation to surveys?
I don't know that we have can relate it to that, but we have changed. We try lots of different ways to increase access to that information. The one that has changed most recently is that we put reminders to our colleagues who haven't shared. So targeted specifically and said, oh, just to remind you, you can go on to Oracle and update. And what that has been a real interesting nudge. So what we've seen is a real spike where people have gone, oh yeah, maybe I forgot. I thought I'd done that. Even I got a reminder. I thought, I thought I'd shared all of that information already. So we've seen a real spike. So we'll watch what that does. But so the language bit, I think, is in me engaging with you. I can explain it as sharing. So yeah, we haven't collated it with that, but as I said, the nudging and sharing is one of the nudges. Is what we're doing all of the time.
Brilliant. There are some incredible questions in the chat, Loraine, and I'm really mindful of the fact that we've got you until 2:30, so we'll try and get through as many as possible. But one of the questions that immediately struck me as I was hearing this was something that I've never heard before, which was the direct nexus between ED&I and a business objective. I've never heard of anything so stark before. And Natasha has gone exactly to that question as well. Can you expand a bit more on that, please? How your awareness came to that discrete area being so
Yeah.
connected to a business objective.
One of the things about working in diversity inclusion that I love is just you just need to be creative, and I'm not diminishing that, but in order to help get people involved, to help people understand their own contributions, we have to think about different ways of helping people to see why diversity inclusion is part of their business. So one of the things has been around accessibility. We have a number of engineers who design our platforms and bridges, and we said the challenge for you is that these facilities that we are building and that we have inherited as Victorian infrastructure, they're not accessible for today's population, for disabled people, if they've got a hearing impairment, mobility impairment, visual impairment. We're not building. So we want you to think about accessibility. We want you to think about, we're creating a modernized infrastructure. We want everyone to be able to utilize it. Engineers love a problem. They like it couching that. So right, I can see my contribution now. It's really tangible. My contribution to diversity is by making these premises, the buildings, the built environment much more accessible. That's one aspect. With the safety one, it literally came out of the two incidents that I described, where clearly the behaviors in those environments were not inclusive. You know, people were being treated poorly, and de facto what resulted was an accident and people were harmed. So in the investigation, it came out that these were the sort of microcultures in those environments. And we said, you know what, the business needs to understand this. So look, where you are being inappropriate, and this thing, you know, this, oh, it's just banter, blah, blah, blah. It can lead to accidents. It means we are unsafe. People are being disrespectful. We are unsafe. If I don't feel psychologically safe in the environment, I'm not going to do my best work. If I'm worried that somebody's going to be bullying and harassing me, I'm not going to deliver my best work. So there's a direct correlation between having a really safe environment and being an inclusive business, which engages you and enables you to do your work even better. So we're building that narrative, Sharon and Nina, because that helps others then say, oh, right now, you get the penny to drop. So many people will come at diversity inclusion from different ways. And I know you talked about, it might be the moral driver, it might be the business case, it might be the actually legally we're expected to do this thing. It's how you help that narrative be really clear and square in your business as your business. What are you here to do? We're here to transport people. People come in all shapes and sizes. If it's not accessible, we're preventing people from accessing a service. Why would we want to do that deliberately? No, we don't. So actually, we need to be much more accessible and de facto inclusive of different types of passengers in order to deliver the service that we want to do. Does that make sense?
It does. It's a brilliant expansion of the metaphor as well, actually. So Krish has asked a question that I'd like to bring to both you and Nina, if I may, and it's around recruitment. And essentially, Krish is asking the question, how, when she's based in York, how do you recruit diverse talent when they have to be within a certain distance? And she says signalers needing to be within a certain distance were sometimes restricted to the immediate area and therefore restricted in terms of diversity. How do we recruit diverse talent when those are the conditions that are set for us in our recruitment? How would you go about supporting or advising Krish with that? Both Nina and Loraine, it would be helpful for your perspectives on that.
Loraine, shall I kick off? Yeah. It's hard. So I'm not going to sit here and say that there is, to use your phraseology from earlier, Sharon, there is no silver bullet with this. The candidate market across the piece at the moment is a really interesting one. I've been doing what I do for over 20 years and I have never seen a candidate market like this one. So we have still got people who are actively looking for a new role, but there are far fewer people who are actively looking and more people who are appearing to want to sit tight at the moment and kind of see how things play out. There are a number of different reasons for that, which is kind of, I guess, not really what we're here to discuss today, but things like professional confidence. Do I feel able to apply for a new job, etc.? Lots of things impacting this. We always, at Intuitive, we are absolutely determined to present the best talent in each shortlist that we present to a client. That's a given. That's what we're here to do. But what we also want to do is make sure that our candidate network, so the pond that we are fishing in, has got as many different types of people in it as possible. And so it is difficult, and there are certainly parts of the UK which are more challenging than others to recruit from a diverse geography if you are restricted to needing to be at a certain place of work. What I would say from that perspective is that we need to be making the effort. So the employer, in my case, the recruitment company, needs to be making the effort. What immediately comes to my mind is a piece of work that my colleague Caroline, who I'm delighted to say has been with Intuitive for 5 years. Before that, Caroline worked in the operational railway, and she was a huge ambassador for diversity when she was at Northern Trains. When Caroline was at Northern, they went out as a team into different areas of the community. And I remember a particular project that she discussed with me at the time, where they went into the Asian community to speak to the women in that community, to talk to them about how to put a CV together, what type of jobs there were in the railway, how to approach an interview process. Because these people were from backgrounds where the female in the house didn't go to work. This was a new generation of people who were then looking at the opportunities out there. How can we as an employer support them with that? How can we go out and give something to the community, which in turn, in time, will come back round again? It's harder to do this. You've got to look at different groups. You've got to go out into the community, that might be the real community in real life. It could also be the virtual community, different groups on LinkedIn, different groups on Facebook, other social media channels. Are you reaching out, and are you doing that consistently, not just when you need something?
Thanks, Nina. Really great insights there. Thank you so much. Loraine.
Just a kind of short build, really. I guess part of it is also how we describe the jobs. So if I think of the signaler community, one of the things that you can do with signalers is be flexible. And you can set up your rota in a slightly different way. And actually that might appeal to different people, but we don't necessarily publicize that well enough. And we did a project, and I don't know that it was in York, where we did describe the signaling in a different way, and we did get more women, more Black, Asian, and minority ethnic people applying for those roles. So it's right about the attraction piece, but it's also how do we promote signaling, and what's the image of a signaler? And if you don't know what a signaler does, actually you might not even, you might see the title and not even look at it. But if you describe it in a slightly different way, and it says what it does on the tin, then you might appeal to a broader audience. So that's an additional tip.
That's really helpful. Krish, I hope that you have found those points helpful for you. So Loraine, can I just take you to a question from Joanna? They note that Network Rail has exhausted, and you said, the traditional recruitment methods. And what they're wondering is whether or not the new location offers not only delivering the levelling up policy, but also building diversity of skills and experience into rail. Does the new location support and enable that from your perspective?
Yeah, so just let me give a bit of a qualification to my comment. My comment was really about our traditional approach to recruitment in terms of the patriarchal lineage. Right. So that's the exhaustion, but not in terms of general recruitment. There's so many opportunities really for us in terms of how we describe what we're doing, where things are located, the ways in which we work, how we can embrace different types of work, job sharing, hybrid working, virtual working, all of those opportunities are up for grabs. So that hasn't been exhausted. But what we have exhausted, inverted commas, is, you know, my dad, me uncle, my brother. You know, that stuff is exhausted now. We really
Absolutely.
do need GBR to look at the you know, the wider world and say, right, so, you know, who wants to come and work here, and why would you want, you know, how are we going to attract people from different disciplines so that it doesn't feel like it's, you know, us kind of what's the word, recycling ourselves. You know, we are bringing
Yes,
in some injection of new energy, new blood, as it were, into
absolutely.
so
Thank you
hopefully,
so much.
Joanna, that explains my statement.
Yeah, I think that we've got an amazing opportunity, or certainly the people who are judging the entries for where Great British Railway should have its HQ located, an amazing opportunity. And not only in terms of where is it going to be, but also, and this comes to a question that Jane Fisher's just put in the chat in relation to how do we make transport an attractive market? How do we get people to want to come and work in this industry? And I have, you know, I've got a soapbox that I take everywhere with me on this subject. And you know, I have been referred to as an evangelist for the rail industry, but I can't do that on my own. And I would love to see GBR, as it gets into its stride, and it kind of, when we're looking at where is that organisation going to be located in terms of HQ, that in itself sends a message. So it's going to be good, bad or indifferent. That sends a message, it's an opportunity. But at the same time as that, we can use it to really start to build that story about why transport, why rail is a really amazing sector to work in, because it is. And, you know, we need to get that message out. I'm really passionate about that.
And I think a build on that is how we talk about it. I always describe rail, and any, you know, I've worked in infrastructure for a number of years. The people only really bother about infrastructure when we inconvenience them, right? That's the only time that people think about the infrastructure, or your bills are too high, and actually we need to tell the story about how we are, you know, the connection of people to places, that we contribute to social value, that we're a sustainable industry. So people who are really keen on the environment come and work in our we need to have lots of different narratives about what we do and how we do it and how integral it is to society, because there's a whole section of people that we're just not talking to. And so that's our challenge, Jane, you know, making people appreciate the breadth and importance, the integral nature of transport to our economy and to our people. So that's part of the story that we need to tell better.
Yeah, absolutely. I am conscious that a couple of people have asked a question about reverse mentoring. So Richard and Zamira, thank you for your question on this topic. I am aware that, I know I've heard Andrew Haynes talk about that he has been involved in a reverse mentoring partnership. Is it something that's being used widely at Network Rail, Loraine? And what are your thoughts on it? How do you do it successfully?
So the reason that we did it was to create, I mean, we did it with Andrew quite deliberately to give him an opportunity to engage with difference in a more intimate level. So we held a competition, and we asked people who were in the employee networks who would like to, you know, would you like to mentor Andrew? And we were oversubscribed. I think we were a bit naive. Why would you be? Chance to mentor your chief exec. And with that oversubscription, we then rolled that out to the executive leadership team. So gave them an opportunity. Then if you didn't get first prize, you could have some of his colleagues. And it really has been an opportunity for people to learn about difference. So, you know, you learn about my lived experience as a Black woman working in Network Rail, very different to Andrew's and. So that was the kind of the birth of it. We structured the relationship for a year, so it's time bound. We do a check in 3 months just to say, how's it going? Is the relationship working? And people will say yes or no. If no, then you change the partnership. If yes, then fine. Midpoint check, and then at the end, a kind of closeout ceremony that says, how was it for you? What are the things you've learned? What would you do differently? And what are you handing over to others that will come along and try again? And that's been really important for both parties as a space of reflection, and to say, yeah, actually it wasn't too bad. Actually, I quite enjoyed it. What we've developed now, and so that's been rolled out in the different regions as they've decided, with their executive teams, again, just to have access to and permission to explore what it's like to be in network rail from somebody else's perspective. For our exec, what we've developed it into now is what we call a reciprocal mentoring program, which is more egalitarian. So our exec mentoring people on the kind of leadership behaviors and values that we have as an organization, how to be a really great leader. And the mentors from different backgrounds are, again, sharing their difference. I think the impact has been greater visibility of different talent, some really great conversations that people have felt, in a really safe environment. So speaking truth to power has been really impactful for people to go, right, because as a leader, you think everything's rosy in the garden. Somebody tells you, no, actually, some of your roses, they're a bit manurish. You might want to check. You might want to do some culling somewhere. And that's a really salutary and important part of everybody's growth, in a sense, kind of hearing what it's like to be in an organization from another person's point of view. So we've embraced it. We do mentoring externally. So we're part of the Women in Rail mentoring program. We also do mentoring with business in the community. So we see it as a really important way of bringing, objective kind of views for people to grow their own skills and confidence and so yeah, we're quite invested in it, and we would commend it to others. It's really been very, very productive and really useful, and I'm really glad to hear that Andrew talks about it.
Yeah, he does.
It's brilliant. One of the questions that we've got here in the chat is around tapping the untapped talent that often sits in the lower levels of an organization. So how do you tap into, capitalize on the diverse talent that sits at the lower levels so that they're pipelined through into the organization? Any reflections on that, Loraine?
So one of the ways that we have done that, and I would call this it started off as an unintended consequence, has been our employee networks. So we've got 7 employee networks. They kind of mirror the protected characteristics. And they are fairly democratic, but they are kind of little businesses, little organizations in themselves. They've got leadership teams, they have elections, they've got a plan of action for the year, comms people. They're absolutely prolific in terms of the events that they put on. And what that has done is just surface people that we would never have seen. They wouldn't have had those opportunities to lead, coordinate, front up, give greater visibility to our exec, because we've got an exec sponsor for each of the employee networks. And that has been a really fantastic way, as you said, of surfacing and identifying talent. And alongside that, what those networks do is challenge us in the most constructive way around our policies and practices that need to improve. So again, they build their skills around policy development, around influencing and collaboration. And what we've seen for people in our employee networks, and particularly in the leadership cohorts of the employee networks, is that they've gone on to bigger and better stuff as a consequence of kind of having an opportunity to hone their skills and their craft within the context of an employee network. And it's been absolutely fascinating to watch. The networks have also helped us develop bespoke programs. So we've got a career discovery program, a future leaders program for women, future leaders program for Black staff. Also, because the data has told us this is where there's underrepresentation. And we've similarly got people coming up through those programs that are saying, actually, I really want to access and build my own career. So it's encouraging people to step up and say, right, yeah, this is what I want to do, and then give them opportunities. I think we've still got some work to do. So our talent pipelines and succession planning needs to be much more, I think, sharper and much more diverse. And that is on our to-do list.
One of the things that I'm very conscious of time, so kind of keeping my eye on that. But I've got a question which I imagine there are a few people wanting to get your views on, Loraine, because we're talking about the different things that can be done to support having a more diverse and inclusive workshop. So the mentoring is a fantastic idea, and I'm a massive fan of that myself, in terms of, I think I learn as much as the person that I'm mentoring, absolutely, if not more. So absolutely agree with that. I know from talking to people that your employee networks have been hugely successful. I know some other organisations refer to them as affinity groups. So it's kind of like being able to have a safe place where we can go and talk about our learned experience and what we would like the future to look like is key. But we're all busy. When do we find the time? Because you've got the day job, and then you've got the mentoring, and then you've got the networks. How does that work, Loraine, in terms of making all of this part of what we do, rather than something that, oh, blimey, I'll see if I've got any time to do that at the end of the week, maybe last thing on a Friday?
Yeah, that's a really brilliant question, Nina. I guess in a sense, I think where people feel that they've got something to get out of it, and I don't mean that in a mercenary way. You know, they feel the benefit to themselves, the benefit to the organisation, and they feel valued. You get that discretionary effort. So our employee networks are a manifestation of that discretionary effort. People find the time, and they are supported in finding that time, and de facto we then benefit. So, you know, it's how are people led, how are people encouraged, how are people valued, how are you enabled to do all of the things that you need to do in order to be successful, and how do you feel rewarded for that? And so for me, that speaks to you know, the kind of culture that we want in our business, that people feel that they are able to contribute in different ways, and their different needs are being met by the different activities that they can participate in. Because it's not by compunction. It really is people wanting to do it and wanting to do better. And therefore, I think what we've got in Network Ed is a bit of a movement. We've got over 4,500 people as members of the employee networks.
Wow.
Which is incredible.
It's amazing. Yeah.
So and that they decide. It's not you're not anointed and you become, it's people's own volition. And so tapping into that and feeling that they're part of the change that they want to see, I think is what draws people in, and also the support that they get from each other. So if you tacitly think this is good for me, and I'm giving back as well. I think that generates really goodwill, and I think Sharon talked earlier. There's trust in that space as well. Trust that I can share with you the things that aren't working so well, and that something will be done, or that nothing needs to be done, but I need to air it, or actually something really does need to be done. Can you go and advocate and help chivvy along the changes that we want to see? And we've embraced that. So I think there's a really positive environment around that for both identifying talent, but also the discretionary effort that we get from those networks, because they speak truth to power. They tell us the things that we need to improve. And they're chomping at the bit. Change can't happen fast enough because it just can't. But they are right there at the cutting edge, pushing us to be an even better organization.
Yeah. Which is fantastic. Sharon referred earlier to the fact that we are all agents of change.
Yeah.
But if you're kind of bobbling along on your own, wanting to be an agent of change, wanting to know, right, well, which direction do I follow? Where do I go? What do I do? By the fact that there are groups that I can join and I can go and contribute to that conversation, I can share my experience.
Absolutely.
That gives me a focus. And that
Absolutely.
helps me then accelerate the change that we need to see.
Absolutely.
Loraine, because I say this to you every single time that we have a conversation, I could talk to you for hours. The depth of your experience, the wisdom that you bring, and your straightforwardness, I'm not sure if that's even a word, but the fact that you, what we see is what we get. You tell it as straight, and you tell it as in such an accessible way that we can all understand and we can all feel your passion and your enthusiasm and your commitment. So a massive, massive thank you. I know how busy you are, and the fact that you've given us an hour of your time today, I'm hugely, hugely grateful. So on behalf of everyone who's attended the webinar, and myself and Sharon, I can absolutely know that we've enjoyed the process. We're going on to a breakout session. We're going to have a short comfort break. We're going to do a breakout session where we've encouraged everybody who has attended the webinar today to take part in the breakouts, to have their own discussion in a safe place about what their reflections are on what they've heard so far today, and what they can do differently when they go back to their place of work, what's going to change, what might be one tiny thing, it might be a big thing. Huge thanks for your contribution to that, Loraine. I've got some house rules that I need to go to before we go to comfort break, but you are quite free to leave us with my huge gratitude. Massive thanks, Loraine.
Thank you. Thank you. Been an absolute pleasure.
Much,
absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Great to see you again.